And so everyone, please welcome Steve Phillips. We're so thankful that you have chosen to spend part of your evening with us here tonight. And I'm going to do a quick introduction. And so as we have kind of mentioned throughout our conversations the last 3 weeks, not only has Steve Phillips written How we Win the Civil War. Steve has also written Brown is the New White, How the Democratic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. And he also spends his time writing as a columnist for The Guardian and The Nation, and also an opinion contributor to the New York Times. And as part of, on top of all those things, he serves as host to Democracy in Color, a color-conscious podcast on politics that is part of the political media organization he has formed called Democracy in Color, that is dedicated to race, politics, and the multicultural, progressive New American Majority. Phillips is a graduate of Stanford University and the University of California College of Law, San Francisco, and practiced civil rights and employment law for many years. And so that's what I have. Steve, feel free to expand on that, provide a brief welcome, and then we'll get started with the Q&A tonight. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, thanks for having me. I don't have any expansion other than just to really express my gratitude and appreciation for being with you guys. You spend 2 years we're sitting at the same desk, staring into a screen, typing into a computer, and put something out into the world. And then it's like, oh, my little props. We went from having my little whiteboard around how to, when we were in the early days, Brown versus Board of Education, Strom Thurmond, Basic Human Rights, to try to map out the book, and then doing the various drafts in terms of this was an early full printout of it. So, but it's all conceptual. You don't actually interact with actual human beings. And so it's actually quite rewarding for me to be able to engage with people in terms of seeing how it lands, and that it's being received in a way that we want to have a further discussion around it. So it's actually quite gratifying, frankly. So I'm really delighted to be here with you, and I'm thrilled that this is something you wanted to have in your book club, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Well, appreciate that. It's kind of cool to see, where this idea all started from, seeing that storyboard and whatnot. So that was cool. And actually, this doesn't have to deal specifically with the book, but maybe just start. What was your first time being a grassroots organizer or being an activist? Take us back to that time where Steve Phillips truly started to engage in politics as an activist or organizer.
I think for me, a couple of things I would say on that front, right, is that, I say quite literally that I'm a child of the civil rights movement. And so, born in 1964, grew up in Cleveland Heights, the suburbs of Cleveland. The owner would not sell the home to my parents when we moved there in 64. Had to have a white civil rights lawyer get the house for us. One of my earliest memories was I was like 3 or 4 years old. Martin Luther King came to Cleveland. I remember being on my dad's shoulders and seeing him speak. And also my grandfather was a minister in Cleveland as well. So a lot of the frankly, the faith and religious foundations of social justice and activism were all very much in the milieu of my upbringing. I got and read all the biographies of Martin Luther King at my local elementary school growing up. And so I had all of that kind of background and a longstanding interest in politics and electoral politics. And really in terms of, it's almost like, some people like gardening. I mean, I like politics from a very young age. And my next door neighbor, Art Brooks, ran for state legislature and won when I was like 8 years old. I remember going to his victory party next door and whatnot, so kind of like getting the bug. So for me, all of those things came together in 1984 when Jesse Jackson ran for president. And so you had the combination of a direct and tangible connection to the civil rights movement, being expressed in an electoral electoral framework, and using a lot of the faith and religious metaphor and language. And so all of that spoke very deeply to me as a 20-year-old at that time, and was very, and I like to say I've been trying to build the small R rainbow ever since. And then I do think that both of these books grow out of that experience. And so it was very clear to me when Obama won that his campaign was an extension of the civil rights movement and the manifestation of the diversification of the country, and more people from that coalition being within the context of the country. And I've actually run the numbers. If you took Obama's percentages of the racial groups in terms of what he got, he would not have beaten Reagan in '84 because the country was not yet diverse enough. So it seemed very logical to me, but then I felt like people were not getting the message and that they were discounting the significance and the right lessons. And so that's why I wrote Brown is the New White, was to really try to quantify and illustrate how Obama won and what the implications of that were for politics going forward. And then in a very similar way, I think that for writing how we win the Civil War, a similar type of piece around where are we at this moment in time, and then a lot of people and movements and groups who kind of came out of that same tradition of civil rights and social justice were actually now leading campaigns and leading organizing efforts that have actually flipped the political composition and the political leadership in very important states and states, cities, and counties. And I want to tell that story. I think that that's actually quite critical in terms of the future of where we go from here in terms of social change and politics. So I think that's kind of the through line of the early activism to writing these books.
Very nice. And as you were speaking, I was kind of, you mentioned, did everyone recognize that the coalition and President Obama's campaign was kind of, another stepping stone into that march towards civil rights? We're now 14 years ago. Do people still realize how that election happened and how that Rainbow Coalition was truly what allowed that victory to occur? Or are people still in denial or unaware of that truth?
There's still a lot of denial, put it that way. And that I think in terms of the understanding and a perfect example is in Arizona, right? So I have a whole chapter in the book on Arizona, and really trying to tell the story as well as lay out the math around Arizona's now had statewide Democratic wins in 2018, 2020, and 2022. And you can very directly tie that back to the whole attacks on immigrants around SB 1070, the Show Me Your Papers bill in 2010. And the organizers have consistently done the work to expand the electorate, to bring more and more people of color in general, Latinos in particular, into the electorate. And that has raised the floor of progressive votes that has enabled these victories to occur. So I had the chance, actually, John Laredo, who I feature in the Arizona chapter, he arranged, I was in Arizona last weekend. I had a chance to go to the Tucson Festival of Books, and so John, they arranged for me to meet with the governor, Katie Hobbs. It was a good meeting, and I appreciate what she's doing. But even her people were like, well, actually, a lot of Republicans voted for us, right, in terms of their mindset. And so I actually don't think that that's not true. But in terms of those Republicans would not have mattered if you had not had a higher floor of people of color and Democratic votes, as well as where things are actually trending. Every year, every month, the electorate gets more and more diverse. And so I don't feel that reality is deeply ingrained, and it does not drive progressive and democratic priority, strategy, and spending in the extent that I think that it really should, if you're going to properly take advantage of the demographic trends and what the political implications of them are.
Appreciate you expanding on that. And as we go about this evening, if you have questions for Steve Phillips, please put those in the chat. Our team here will moderate the chat. So yeah, so feel free to put those questions in the chat. And I believe Robin has our next 2 questions for you. Go ahead, Robin.
Hey, Steve. So a two-parter. The first, the book lays out a roadmap of Confederate political strategy from the end of the Civil War today. Like the first part of the book covers that. What do you feel is the relevance of knowing that history? And the second question is from one of our book club members from PEG. Understanding that we are in a civil war, do you have suggestions for how to be proactive instead of reactive?
So, yeah, those are both great questions. So I think that to the first part, the significance of understanding that the Confederates never stopped fighting is that it oriented our thinking around what are the right ways to allocate our time and energy and what is going to produce the kind of results for the kind of society that we actually want to see. And then frankly, how much time and energy are we going to try to spend trying to change the minds of people who are frankly determined to destroy us versus trying to actually build the power to create the kind of society that we want to have. And so I have a lot of concern about overemphasizing, not just overemphasizing, but the unrealistic expectation around what is even possible in terms of the reaching across the aisle, the finding common ground, the trying to achieve bipartisan solutions. And so it's one thing, and this is what I try to really lift up in the epilogue to the book, that we're not, we like to sometimes think that, we would like to believe that we are all subscribed to the same social contract, we all adhere to the same democratic institutions, and that within that context, you can have differences of opinion and well-meaning people can struggle to find, common ground. But we live in a moment, not a moment in time. I mean, as I try to show, I think it goes all the way back to the assassination of Lincoln, 5 days after the supposed surrender at Appomattox, all the way up to January 6th. Is that if everybody believed in democracy, and that then you have an election in which all 50 governors, Democrats and Republicans, certify the results saying that Joe Biden has been elected, then you would show up at the inauguration and if you want to oppose and be loyal opposition. You wouldn't try to destroy democracy and block the peaceful transfer of power. And so I'm trying to disabuse people of the notion that the opposition that we face are people who are playing by the same set of rules. And so that's really one of the things that's what I'm really trying to drive home. And then in terms of so then the implications of that are different in terms of how much, once you get into a position of power, a position of leadership, how much time, energy, resources, and political capital are you going to spend on trying to get agreement from people who are fiercely opposed to you, fundamentally opposed to you, versus how much time and energy are you going to spend to try and build the power of the people who want to see the kind of society that you want to see. And I would actually submit that to a large extent that, and I talk about this some in the book, that the first 18 months of Obama's administration was really spent twisting themselves into a pretzel to try to get support for healthcare reform and multiple different committees, et cetera, and they were never going to agree to that. And so you take that, and I would even also say in terms of the Biden first years, they were very, very, very focused on the bipartisanship and even the first, infrastructure that they did, but they didn't expend their political capital around trying to fight back against the attacks on democracy and attacks on voting, all the voting anti-voting rights acts. And so there needs to be a real crusade to expand democracy, to protect the right to vote, to get more and more people to vote as many people as possible. And so if your mindset is that we've got to build and establish as much political power from multiracial majority as possible, that leads you in a certain direction. But if your mindset is that we've got to find common ground with these folks who are trying to attack and destroy us, that leads you in a different direction. So those are some of the implications of what I was trying to distill in the book.
Go ahead, Robin.
I was just saying, thank you for that. So for our next question, in chapter 6, you used a term called anchor organizations. And that really kind of struck me as an interesting concept that I had never heard before. But from the reading, I kind of gleaned, and I spoke with some of the other book club team members as well. And we got the general consensus that it means an organization that, one, has a proven track record of progressive activism, and then two, a certain level of stability in a particular geographic area. So what are some of the other traits for anchor organizations, and how do you view their role in progressive organizing?
So I think that, yeah, I think what you guys were focusing on is correct. And so in all of the different case studies that I illustrate in the book, Georgia, Arizona, San Diego, Virginia, Harris County, Texas, you have these common elements. And so one of the things I was reflecting back on as I was putting the book together is that, first of all, it's very hard work to do voter coordination mobilization, particularly at some scale. There's just the number, just being able to recruit and train volunteers and staff to be able to come up with the maps and then the spreadsheet or everybody need to have them go out, track that data when it comes back in, be able to do all of that work on an ongoing basis is very hard work. And it's also work that does require resources. So you don't see a lot of groups doing that to start with. So in these places, there has been a core organization with steady leadership. And all of these places have had the same leaders for over 10 years driving and moving this work forward. And so when I say anchor group, because then other groups plug in to that work. And so, I used to use Arizona as an example because I was more intimately involved with that this past year around the work that the Coalition, Arizona Coalition, and Arizona, that's the 501c3, and the Arizona Wins is the 501c4. And then groups like Lucha are like some of the core anchor type groups. But they play a role of doing the work to track the voter contact efforts and to centralize that, and then to have the other groups plug in. And so they had a regular spreadsheet that they would send around what the work was in Arizona. And so the rows were the different groups, and then the columns were the different areas where they would have the voter contact. So in this city or this legislative district, this group would contact this number of voters, and then what the results would be, and then they'd actually get out to vote. And then another group would go to a different area. So there's a coordination effort there in terms of efficiency of your efforts, but it requires somebody to have the big picture and then to track the data, and then that capacity that everybody else could then plug into. And so that's kind of what it means in a lot of ways by anchor organization.
Awesome, thank you for that. And Jamel, I think you have a question next.
Sure, and I'm gonna lead with a question that we got from one of in our group, Jane. Is that right, Wes? Give me a thumbs up if that's what you meant. Okay, great. And Steve, you're coming through a little bit garbled at times, and I don't know if we'll give it a little bit more. It might help if you turn off your camera, although that ruins everything because we want to see you. But well, I guess Robin will jump in and say, how it's going. But, oh, Jane wants to ask her own question, so I'm going to turn it over to Jane.
And Jane will ask you to turn your mic on. I think it is.
Is it on? Okay, you can hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much, Mr. Phillips, for coming. Your book has been very encouraging and also inspiring. I've really been thinking a lot about everything that I'm reading, and I appreciate it very much. I'm here in Texas, so that kind of gives you the framework. And I've read a lot, we've talked a lot about getting the vote out and turning red states blue. And we talk about the LGBTQIA+ community, the Black lives, the women, the immigrants, the anti-Semitism, or the Semitism that's going on, anti-Semitism that's going on, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like we're swatting at flies. And while each of these areas is of utter import and needs to be addressed directly, I equally wonder about the possibility of addressing the taproot, which I believe to be white supremacy. And so given the current rate at which laws from a very grassroots level and up are being ruthlessly rewritten, my question is, should there be, or is there, and I think we've alluded to it several times, and I read something in your book just today that might answer this, but I'd like to hear from you. Is there currently a part of our long game strategy that calls us all together in a very tangible and practical way in one united voice for all of humanity, for the immediate purpose of at least putting a pause on the current rate of progress being made by the white supremacists?
Where in Texas are you?
I'm in just north of Houston, a very red, neon red suburb.
Houston itself used to be red, so there's that. Progress we can move forward on. I believe turn this question around a common focus. So I do think that the speeches that President Biden gave on really the threats to democracy, I think that those were actually very important, and I think in the right direction. I feel that, I really feel this coming out of the midterms, right? Because I could not, well, I understood, but I fundamentally disagree with all the pessimism heading into the midterm elections. There was such a foregone conclusion that the Republicans are going to win, the Democrats in the power party loses. And I'm like, why is that a given? Even after redistricting, 226 congressional seats were won by Biden. You need 218 to hold the House. And so isn't it a question of getting out our vote? If we get our vote, then we should be able to win. And the analysis is very, very wrong in terms of what the mainstream media, how they looked at it. So I felt very affirmed fundamentally by the midterm elections. And what I've really been starting to think more about from then is that in terms of this common purpose piece is that we need a crusade for democracy, in that the whole issue of everybody being able to vote and that being the essence around to defend our democracy. And so fundamentally, like I had when I practiced law, one of my mentors was Tony Tanky in California. He says I have learned that the single best way to know what to do tactically in a lawsuit, look at what the opposing counsel was doing and do the opposite. Right? And that had actually served him quite well. And so I feel that the obsession with attacks on voting rights and stopping people from voting really should be assigned to us, that they're really how central that issue actually is. And I do try to lift that up in the book in terms of South Carolina and Mississippi being majority Black after the Civil War. And so, of course, they had to stop people from voting and then try to have fewer people vote. So I feel that can be the rallying cry. So I came out of the midterms feeling like we should have a crusade for democracy. I've been using largely as a metaphor, but also not this phrase, we need 1 million precinct captains. And that every precinct in the country, we have somebody whose job it is to have the list of people who are eligible to vote, contact all of them, get as many of them as possible registered to vote, and get as many possible registered to vote to actually turn out to vote. And that's something I feel that can be spearheaded by the White House and by the president. And then they had the president and challenge the country's civic leaders and corporate leaders. Right, there was a letter that 100 corporations signed on to opposing the voting rights restrictions, a lot of these bills. But there should be a summit. The president should convene a summit of all of these people and then challenge all of these corporations to use all of their platforms to do everything possible to get as many people as possible to vote. And it's not even a partisan issue. It's like in a democracy, everybody should be able to vote. So why doesn't every Amazon package have on the side of it a URL or a phone number about how to know where to register to vote and to vote, to encourage people to actually vote? I mean, I live in California when they did the legislation to that Uber and Lyft didn't like, and they moved to a ballot measure. So when I ordered my food from Uber Eats, I got little messages on the app saying vote against this ballot measure. So they can do that for that. Why can't they put on the app, register to vote? Here's how you go to register to vote. So I feel like that can be a cross-cutting universal call to action, is to do everything possible and everybody use every possible platform to get everyone registered and everybody voting. And it frankly should not be that controversial in terms of a democracy wanting people to actually vote. But I feel like that can be a thing that we can have a very, very broad agreement on and kind of a common cause that cuts across.
Thank you for that. Well, it actually is a little bit of up for debate, apparently, in Texas. So we tried to set up a table outside of it was a school, but it was, not during school, and it wasn't a partisan anything. It was just registering to vote, and we were denied because they knew who we were. So.
Oh yeah, no, they're aggressively denying it, but I hope that they can say credibly out loud that we don't think we should be voting. And that's right. That actually goes against the essence of democracy, which is why they try to do the, fraud, et cetera, et cetera. But that I think we have to be more aggressive on the progressive side to say that this is a democracy and everybody should vote. That should be the default. And we should be really trying to push in that direction rather than giving space and ground to the notion of widespread fraud. What there's far more of is our democracy.
So Steve, we had somebody who might have audio skills suggested it might help if you moved away from the mic and removed your earpods. I don't know if that does anything or not, but
fine to
yeah.
do that. I mean, I put a lot of time and effort into my little infrastructure. So I'm hardwired and I do these different podcasts. Let me take these out.
Let's see how that works.
So AirPods are out.
Oh, much better.
So, I wonder if it was trying to come. Oh, you know what? I apologize. Oh, hold on a second. I apologize. I think what was happening was my audio was trying to go through the AirPods instead of through my microphone.
Well, we all need to thank Debbie because she sent me a message and she said, have him do this. So that was pretty amazing. You're now much clearer.
Sorry.
So where are we, Wes and Robin?
Yeah, thank you, Jane, for that question. And Alexi has put a question in the chat. And so, Alexi, would you like us to turn your mic on, or would you like us to read your question? And I'm trying to find you in the gallery view as well. And it's Alexi, I'm gonna ask you to turn your mic on, or we can read it for you, whichever.
Yes, I'm sorry.
You're
because I
okay.
was in the middle of typing another question too. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I really was. Um, you know, I have a question on this. And, for the author, and I love this book. I really did. And I want to know when we are in these kind of situations, and then when we make progress in this civil war, when we make a progress, it is very calculated that people, the powers that be, uh, set us back and make it so that we can't move forward, or that if we try to move forward, there are, and it's worse. And I didn't say this in my question, so if you could see because I can't see my original question, because I had a different question, but can you see that, you
Yeah,
all? We can ask it for you if you'd like, Can you Alexa. ask that, please? Sure. So, the part of the question is that there seems throughout history, whenever Black people make progress, there is a very specific backlash to this progress. And can you speak on that and how specifically that ties into the Confederate battle plan?
Yeah, so I think that goes to the question on long game and long game on our side and on their side. And so, I mean, most clearest recent example, right, is the overturning Roe v. Wade 50 years later, right? And they never stopped trying to undermine it, and they still haven't stopped trying to undermine Obamacare and universal health care. And so there's a relentlessness to the attacks that we face, and which is also why I feel like it's helpful to orient ourselves in the mindset that the Confederates and their descendants are continuing to wage that war. And so I think we can gird ourselves. So I would say that. And then I also think in terms of when we do make gains, that then are we proceeding to pass policies, establish practices, create laws that solidify those gains and that will help us withstand the attacks that are going to actually subsequently come. And so that gets to the thing I'm saying, fundamentally, there is nothing more clear cut than being able to expand voting and civic participation as much as possible, as many people as possible, because that I feel is what's ultimately going to protect us from the subsequent attacks that they're going to be bringing down the pike. And so when you get in power in a local level, what are we doing to make it easier to vote, to be able to remove the barriers that people face, and then those things are going to come under attack as well. So we have to keep at it also, right? So Harris County, Texas, they instituted 24-hour voting, and then right away they're trying to undo the 24-hour voting. The craziest thing is this piece around. You would think that cash-strapped public entities would want money to be able to carry out their functions, but they're passing laws saying, don't take money from Zuckerberg, which is philanthropic private money, to be able to make it easier to vote. But they're trying to pass laws saying you cannot do that, to ways that would actually make the electoral process more accessible. So, but I still think there are a lot of things that can be done at the state and local level in terms of being able to make voting in particular easier, more user-friendly. I think I used the example in the book about how they tried to use the voter ID laws to try to restrict people's access. So what they did in Virginia, when they had a progressive as the Secretary of State, is they said, okay, we'll have a digital camera and a printer in the polling place. And so we'll take a picture and then you can actually use that as your voter ID. And so we have to be as creative and relentless in terms of defending the gains that we've made as our opponents are, in terms of trying to undo everything that we're moving forward.
Thank you. Because, yeah, it just seems to me that every time there is a movement, just like 2020, and everybody said, okay, we see it with our own eyes, we saw it. And then it's almost like
okay, we're going to change everything, and you didn't see what you saw with your own eyes, and we're going to change everything because people want to help. And then now there is this um, woke, even everything that they're saying. And it's just, to me, it seems like every time there are some steps that are made forward, then the powers, those powers that be on the, they come in and then they make it, do their dog whistles, and they make it so that there we go backwards 10,000 steps. We could make forward 2 steps, and now we're making backward steps. And so um that I know is what you were talking about in your that's their playbook. But
Right. And that's, I think it has to do with us being confident in our own agenda and confident in the fact that the majority of people actually do support us. And so, and then also pointing out the hypocrisy about the opposition. As I've been, did a few tweets and Facebook posts about this now. So it's like there's all of this, particularly out here. I'm in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and so there's all this libertarian politics, all this anti-big government politics, and we have to stop the big government in our lives, et cetera, which is a very widespread point of view until Silicon Valley Bank fails. Then there's a long line of libertarians outside the doors of the federal government saying we want a federal bailout. And so this notion around what is government and what is the society we operate with. So we need to be far more, I feel, confident and bold in the kinds of policy proposals and the agenda that we put forward, instead of being, I think that the other side puts us on the defensive, like, that's all attacks on the critical race theory and this and that. I don't think we're going back at them as forcefully enough as we should. Like, DeSantis says, oh, Black history doesn't count. And the response is that too many of our responses are like, oh, well, you're taking away parents' choice. We need to respond and say, no, you're actually trying to promote white supremacy and put them back on the defensive in that regard. And so I think that that's an important understanding of how we move in this. So Democrats are more afraid. I think about this today. I think we're more afraid of losing support than we are focused on inspiring and mobilizing support. When I've tried to document when I really was inspired by the groups I feature in the book, is they have won, and they have won through this approach of trying to organize and inspire and mobilize more and more people. And every single day, the population shifts in our direction. So that really should fortify us to strongly believe in and advance the things that we care about.
And that's actually a great segue. Darcy just sent me a question privately and asked, how do we address the woke narrative? Personally, I am proudly woke. How can I use that offensively?
I was thinking about that today, and I was like, what's the opposite of woke, right? Asleep, right? I mean, it's like, what are they actually calling for in this regard? And I think it's also this point around, it's just, people thought, they say it's around like whatever racist or sexist jokes. Oh, we're just joking. And I was like, we need to take the part like, what's the joke? Like, what's the humor there in terms of really being able to push back on this? And so that's where I feel like fundamentally there's a question of values and vision around the society. In that, do we want to have a society where we care about and respect and validate and believe in everybody, or are we far more about dividing and excluding, which is the essence of really what the woke attacks are? And so when people say that, I would want to dig deeper and put them back on the defensive about it. So are you saying that respecting and protecting all the different members of our society so that they can't be discriminated against, so they can't be attacked, so they can't be marginalized, that's bad, right? But that's kind of the essence of it. So I think that's falling back on the larger values and and beliefs. And I think fundamentally it's also about challenging people on those fundamental beliefs, because I think that's something that I do feel weighs down progressive and democratic politics, is this fear that if you say something that's too progressive or too supportive of multiracial justice and unity, that you're going to lose all of this support. And so what that doesn't appreciate, and I don't even think the math is good, period, is that there are actually, and frankly, it just, explicitly is that there's this fear that you're going to lose white support. But there are actually a lot of white people who want there to be a multiracial society, who will be inspired and motivated and respond to the notion about we should create a society that everybody cares about. And I think the math lays itself out in that regard. And so that's kind of how I would come back at these folks who are, is to probe what exactly do they mean, and then to lift up and say, yes, I do believe these values, that we should have this kind of society that you are trying to attack with this, with the pejorative label.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Darcy. Jamel, I believe, has our next question.
Sure. And is this, I'm going to ask the one that you've touched on this a little bit, Steve, and thanks very much, for what you're talking about in terms of giving us fuel to fight back against the anti-wokeness. It just seems that the problem is you've got a group of people who are building bridges, and then you've got people who just attack and destroy things. And we know that it's much easier to knock down the sandcastle on the beach than it is, for like the child who puts it all together. So somehow we've got to flip that on its head. But when you were talking about the fact that you were championing the work of people who were successful and echoing it, do you have specific examples of people who have been touched by your work and have done something as a result? In other words, can you share a story of how you are making a difference through the actions of other people?
Well, the two of the things I think I would point to, I think that have actually, I think have been most consequential. One is, well, they're at different scales ultimately, but I lift these up in the book. And so in San Diego, which I didn't even fully remember until I was talking to Andrea Guerrero about it, who started Alliance San Diego. But I knew Andrea from when she was an immigration lawyer with a small law practice. And so she wanted to go create Alliance San Diego 10, 12 years ago. And so we helped her get her very first grant to actually get going. And then so she used that as also credibility and validation to go around and get other support to be able to build their operation up. And they, she's built her organization up into a multi-million-dollar organization. They have taken the city council from a 5-4 Democrat-Republican split to 9-0 Democrat. They've taken control of the Board of Supervisors in San Diego County. And that's a direct outgrowth of the work they've been doing. And they've secured support from Mackenzie Scott, who gave them a significant grant for their work. They bought a building in San Diego, bought a building in the neighborhood with a lot of homeless people. They've intentionally put themselves in that community and are in relationship with that constellation of people. And so Andrea's, she points back to was our early support of her that enabled her to go on that path. And then the most consequential, just quantitatively and whatnot, is that, we were one of the first outside of Georgia supporters for Stacey Abrams, was my wife and me. And so she came to meet with us in 2012 and helped her put together, get early. So I remember helping her raise the first $20,000 for what she was trying to do in 2012. And that, she came to us when she was starting New Georgia Project and says, there's 1.5 million unregistered voters in Georgia. I'm going to go register them to vote. And did that work over the course of a decade. And that's what enabled the Georgia to flip on beating Donald Trump. And that's what enabled the whole United States Senate to flip and the whole United States Congress. And so Stacey, she called us in 2021 after the COVID bill had passed. And I was, I said, so you took that first 20,000 we helped you raise and you've turned it into $2 trillion to the American people, right? And so she says, I like to provide return on investment. But in terms of the reach and the scale, and I was on that train when it was a very uncrowded bandwagon, and we were early supporters of Warnock. Before that was lots of difficulty trying to help him raise money in the early days. So I take great satisfaction from those efforts that have both proven the theory of the case, but also have impacted and changed the country in ways that is enormously gratifying, satisfying.
Thank you for that. And the context for the question is, that you've got a lot of people in this book club who are touched by what you've done, and we are looking. We keep asking ourselves, okay, now that we've read this, what can we do? So I'll just say that you are, in fact, somebody is not here because they read the book and you inspired them, and they're actually at a fundraiser for a politician in Colorado that I think that they heard about through the book. So I'm just saying you're already touching our readers.
Well, I appreciate that. It means a lot. It means more than you guys probably realize. And so I think I would, just, further say, I think two things is this point about this, million precinct captain concept is that everybody can do something in terms of getting more people registered and voting. And so that's like a very important, fundamental piece. And then the other thing is local office and local government, both in terms of running as well as showing up. And that I think when I was on the school board in San Francisco for 8 years, and every year we signed off on a $500 million budget, and we have 65,000 students, 5,000 teachers. So we affected a lot of people's lives in that regard, and that was through local government. And so there's a role there, and there's a lot of potential power and influence to impact people's lives through running, but also through showing up and being constructive gadflies, reading the budgets and tracking and holding them accountable and shining a light on what actually happens. And so everybody can play that kind of role as well. And I think that's part of the nitty-gritty of democracy. So I would just encourage people to kind of look at those roles as well.
Appreciate that. And that kind of was going to be my segue for the, kind of what is your last rally cry to all of us who are on the call, which spans about 24, 25 different states. I know from previous conversations, a lot of states that are currently red and in the South as well. And so, and you gave us two concrete things we all can do, get someone registered to vote, get involved in local politics, government. Let's just, because, I said 45 minutes, we've already gone over, so I want to honor your time. Take the next 2 minutes. What is your final, because we are in a war. And so what is that final rally cry that you want people to leave with? And, we'll put this up on YouTube as well. And so to those who haven't had the chance to read the book, what would you say to us and them as that final rally cry?
Well, I would say there's probably 2 or 3 things I think that would, in addition to what we've talked about before, that I would really encourage people to take a look at in terms of the focus, in terms of where we apply energy and efforts, and where there's high potential leverage as well going forward. And so I mentioned about local government. I think that's very underappreciated. And also you can have high leverage because not a lot of people do focus on it. And so somebody who can dig in there, you can actually find opportunities to much better allocate resources in the work that actually takes place. So like reading those budgets, showing up at these different meetings, tracking these things. So that's one thing in terms of local government. But there's 2 kind of watchdog potentially very high leverage, I would call them projects, that I think if anybody could do, and certainly a constellation of groups, a constellation of people like, you guys could do. One is this piece around challenging the entire democratic apparatus. Actually, before that, there's another thing in terms of people in red states. I think I mentioned this in the other book, but just to say it here, there's a focusing it on blue and potentially blue cities in red states. I think is ways to really be able to move forward and make progress. And so it's not get discouraged by the fact that statewide you may not be able to have the impact you want to have right now, but that in some of these different cities and counties, you can both get influence and then use that influence to improve the lives of the people who are in that area. And then that work, particularly if you're doing a democracy expansion, can help with the statewide work. And that's kind of the essence, actually, of the Texas strategies. I'm going to call it Texas Organizing Project. And the math bears itself out. It's really 8 to 10 counties is where the work needs to take place within Texas. And within those counties are the votes that'll transform the whole state. So that's one thing. So then in terms of the two projects part, one is the challenge every level of the Democratic Party to really fundamentally just basically have better best practices in terms of transparency and accountability. And so I wrote a little bit about this in the Nation column I did recently, the open letter to the new DCCC chair. But there's so little transparency around how the hundreds of millions of dollars get spent by these different committees, who spends them. And so if you even wanted to get a job, or certainly, are these jobs posted? Where would you even apply? Who actually does the hiring? There's a piece recently about there's going to be leadership change at the Super PAC Priorities USA. And none of the articles, New York Times, nobody says, who is going to do the hiring for the next? And so we have these hundreds of millions of dollars that get determined, and the leadership of it gets determined, frankly, under cover of darkness. And you would get, if you spent $10 buying a stock, you would get far more information about that company than you would get from the Democratic Party if you give them $1 million. But I know people who have given them $1 million and haven't gotten the kind of feedback and how does the things work, et cetera. So there's just really ultimately there's a question about strategy, and we're doing the right strategy, but just the best practices, transparency, accountability, explain the rationale and the data underpinnings for how the money actually gets spent, and to demand that at every level. I think with all of the internet tools that we have now, we can have a higher level of accountability in that regard. And then similarly, that type of watchdog role, I feel, needs to be applied to all these commitments that were made after the murder of George Floyd, that lots of different entities and individuals and corporations and foundations made all of these commitments around what they were going to do about racial justice. And I know for a fact that a lot of them are being backing away, and they're not being implemented, and the urgency and the momentum has been waning. And I think that only can take place because it's not being scrutinized and watched and called out, right? So Indivisible got started with a Google Doc. Where's the Google Sheet that lists out all of the different commitments that people made, the amount of money, and then contact them, call them up, email them, track them. Where are you at with that $100 million commitment? How much of it has actually gone out? What is actually transpired in that regard? That's something I think there's both a moral imperative to that, but there's a whole bunch of money that got committed that if we were vigilant and applied the pressure, we could move significant amounts of money towards racial justice that literally George Floyd gave his life for. So those are a couple of very high leverage opportunities that I would leave people with.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate the work that you have done and your willingness to share that so that, together we can win this war and end white supremacy once and for all. Truly appreciate your commitment to that, and for allowing others to engage in that work and make it a #1 priority for our country. So really appreciate your time and all that you are doing. We really thank you, and we're excited to finish the book next week, and I'm probably going to need to buy your first book as well and catch up on what you shared there. So thank you so much again, Robin, Jamel. If you wanted to say any parting words, go ahead. But if you want to stick on, we're going to talk chapter 7 and 9, but also understand if you need to go and take care of some other things as well. So thank you.
Well, I want to say now to thank you guys for the invitation and for being part of it. I really, like I was saying, you write a book in a kind of in a vacuum, and so to really be able to engage with people who appreciate the work, and this kind of exchange is very helpful to me too, because it's also very broad and seeing what are the particular questions and how does it manifest itself in the real world. Something that's very valuable to me as well. So I really appreciate it.